You know I'm right. Nick Durst here with Joe Calabrese. And Joe, is there a doctor in the house? Yes, there is a doctor of journalism here joining us today, National Association of Broadcasters Hall of Famer in 2019. He, of course, is the host of America's #1 pregame show, Fox
Yes.
NFL Sunday. And got to check out his amazing new series on A, America's Top Dog. Joe, why don't you let our listeners know who the top dog is here today as our guest?
And he's also somebody with ties to the New York area over here. And we watched him when we were younger. He did MSG Sports, that desk show. He did stuff for Fox. We're really, really happy to have him on. Thanks again for doing this. Curt Menefee, the host of America's #1 pregame show. How are you today?
All right, guys, you make me feel old. But let's see, I'm a doctor. You watched me when you were a kid, all that stuff. But it shows longevity. I guess is a good thing in this business. Good to be with you.
No, I'm glad to have you here. So you grew up in Georgia. So
yep, Atlanta.
A lot of sports there. How did the decision come about for you to head to college in Cedar Rapids, Iowa?
I don't know. It's one of those things that you look back and it's a decision you make when you're 17 years old that makes zero sense, but worked out for you. And that's the honest answer. I knew I wanted to go to a small school. I grew up in Atlanta, so a big city. I knew I wanted to go to a small school and I wanted it to be far enough away from home that I didn't run home every weekend because I was homesick or to do laundry. I want to be independent. And Iowa kind of fits that bill. It's a little bit different than Atlanta, but it was just one of those things, it felt right. And so I wound up going there. They had no journalism program, no college radio station. I mean, there was really, knowing that I wanted to be involved in television. At that point, I thought I wanted to be a producer, but that's another story I'm sure we'll get into. But it made no sense for me to go there. It just felt like the right place to go. And I wound up going there the summer after my freshman year, interned at CNN, which is based in Atlanta. And that gave me my first TV experience. Went back at the beginning of my sophomore year, hooked up with a local station in Cedar Rapids. Again, thought I wanted to be a producer. Guy was like, put your voice down on tape. Just see what it's like. Take the voiceover the highlights that we do each night. And I did it. And a couple of weeks later, he came back to me and said, hey, I took it to the news director. We think we want to have you report just on high school and small college sports in Iowa. I was 19 years old, man. I go, sure, what the heck, I'll do it. It sounds like fun. And that was how my TV career started.
So in your bio, it says you worked a 5-day internship schedule on top of doing stuff for college. And then because you ended up doing so many internships and you kept yourself active, you were able to get a job immediately, I believe, in Jacksonville. So how did that opportunity come about for you, and how difficult was it to juggle all those responsibilities while you were still in school?
Yeah, no, I mean, for me, I probably worked more than I went to school. I still graduated on time. The degree still counts. But I spent most of my hours actually, because I started at the local station when I was 19. So my sophomore year, I was on the air starting that April because I had learned how to edit by being an intern at CNN. So I knew how to do that when I got back. The guy taught me how to shoot a camera. I edited highlights, I wrote, and then I started reporting. So all of that summer between my sophomore and junior year, I wound up being the fill-in anchor for 2 weeks while he was on vacation. All this stuff. So I got experience that other kids weren't getting, and it's not knocking anybody. But I know people that went to Syracuse or Missouri, these legendary journalism schools, but when they graduated, they had the reel they made in class. When I graduated, I had been on the air at that time it was the 96th market, I think, in the country. But for 2.5 years, doing actual real reporting on a timeline, on a deadline. And so that helped me tremendously. And I think by going to a small liberal arts institution like Coe College, where I went in Iowa, it allowed me that freedom to do it because, I was an American studies major. And so much of my work was about writing and reading, which kind of fits into, I think, what I do on a daily basis now. So I think for me, it was actually pretty easy. It's not like I was a math major, and then had to go and try to write a story. This is far different. But I always tell kids, man, do whatever you can, because one door leads to another. Had I not, the first time I hooked up with the station in Cedar Rapids, it was just to carry some gear. And he's like, you don't get paid, you don't get to be on TV. And that wound up leading to the other thing. But, everything I've tried, it's about being willing to be uncomfortable and go, I don't know how to do this, but I'm going to try it and I'm going to give it a shot. And then you do it. If you like it, you like it. If you don't, you don't. But if you do it and you show people, whoa, this person actually wants to be good at something, they will give you opportunities that maybe you haven't even thought of.
Yeah, it's great that you know the behind the scenes stuff. How much better of a broadcaster do you think it makes you knowing what goes into maybe a 2-minute clip as far as graphics, B-roll, and all that?
I think it did 1,000 times. Because for me, I started out like that, and I started out doing what we in the business call a one-man band. I would shoot, I would edit, I would write, I would do everything, and then I go on the air and report it or anchor it, depending on where I was. So I learned every aspect of it. So I think I have an appreciation. Also, I go back to when I started out, I really truly wanted to be a producer and wanted to be behind the scenes. So I think about, the timing of it, but how the story works together, how things are written, about the process that happens. And now that I'm at a level where I'm on Fox NFL Sunday and I'm not shooting things or editing things, I still do some writing. So I'm involved in that, but I also appreciate the work that other people do. And it makes it, I think, a better product because one, you know what can and can't be achieved, but two, you don't take for granted that someone busted their ass to get a shot. That may be a hell of a shot, but you don't think, oh, okay, this is just cool. We may use it, we may not. You kind of, at least for me, seek to reward, good work. And so I do think knowing all those elements, but also it helps, and you'd have to talk to our producer on the show, but I think it helps on a Sunday when our producer, Bill Richards, is in my ear, and he's saying, hey, we got one more segment, but we're running over here. So can we tighten some things up? And me moving guys along and those kinds of things. So I think having that background has made me so much better at what I do today.
So did you have reservations going into television? Because you did say that you were a writer, and obviously you bouncing around, you went from markets like Des Moines to Dallas, which was a step up. Obviously you came to New York, which we alluded to at the top. So was there kind of a transition process between going into TV? Did you find it easy? Because a lot of people do find it difficult.
Yeah, no. I mean, I was fortunate. I kind of go back to, if you want to talk about growing up in Atlanta, I was single mother, one of two kids. So I'm the oldest of 4 years older than my brother. But my mom always said that even when I was a kid, she was like, you've got an old soul, but that I never got nervous about anything, whether it's a school play, whether it was meeting people. And I was actually kind of shy, but I was never, ever nervous. And I think that helped me when it came to television, because I go, you know what? Nobody's going to die if I screw up a team name or a score or whatever. And that's always kind of been my approach. And so everywhere I've been, I mean, I graduated from college. I'd been on the air in Cedar Rapids. They offered me a full-time job in news, and I knew I wanted to do sports. And so then I left there, I went to Des Moines, and then I left there. And the first job I had as an anchor was in Madison, Wisconsin. And that's one, best example, was the very first night I was on the air. Hey, let's welcome in our new guy, Curt Menefee. He's just joining us here at, WISC TV3. Hey, Curt, welcome. It was a Friday night for high school football. Well, I don't know if you have been to Wisconsin or much of the Midwest, a lot of Native American names for towns and high schools. So I'm on the air and I'm trying to read the score. And, I hadn't had time to go over any of these. I didn't know these towns, like Akanamawak. I'm like, Akanamawa. And so it became like this almost a comedy routine where the anchors were laughing at me on my first night, but I was laughing with them because I know, hey, this will happen once. We'll get over it and everybody will have a good time. But that's always been my approach. It didn't make me nervous. I didn't freak out about it. I'm just like, it is what it is. And, you strive to get better, obviously, but that's always been my approach. So the transitions to different markets, I went from, Madison, Wisconsin, then I went to Jacksonville, I went to Dallas, I went to New York, and hooked up with Fox while I was in New York. And everything's just been a transition for me to just try to be the best in whatever market I was at that time, or whoever I was competing against, if you will. And the rest of it will take care of itself. That's always been my approach.
You come close at all this past season, almost slipping up with the Washington football team, just because that name's ingrained in your mind so many years.
It happened, but I tried to make sure it only happened once, but old habits are hard to break. Right. I still want to say the Oakland Raiders,
Yeah, Las Vegas.
What about the San Diego Chargers, LA Chargers?
That one comes out more often than not. It seems like San Diego Chargers.
Right.
Yeah, who knows? Before long, they'll realign the conferences again, and it'll be. And now you got to, you can't be saying this year, 500 team, not possible. No 500 teams.
Unless there's a tie.
If there's a tie, yes.
If there's a tie, yes.
Very true. Very true. Now, you also did some early national work, right? With Sports News Network, you were doing national stuff. and you jump between that and doing the local broadcast. So was there any challenges for you at that time, switching gears, knowing between, I'm doing local sports here, but now I also got to do national stuff at the same time?
No, again, I'm not poo-pooing everything, but it's like, I think part of it is just it's always been my approach. It doesn't matter, whatever the assignment is ahead of me, what does it take to get the story done from point A to point B? And it doesn't matter if it's a national story or going to a national audience or local. I think the only difference is you are thinking about the people that are on the receiving end. And if you're in, at that time I was in Madison, Wisconsin. And so if you're doing a story there, the people have a little bit of background about what's happened with, I'm just throwing out the UW basketball team. They may not need a reminder about what's going on that season. Whereas if you're doing it from a national standpoint, people may not have the ins and outs. So you may add a line or two just for that, but otherwise the approach has always been the same.
Yeah, awesome. Now you're in Dallas, you're really starting to make some inroads here and getting some popularity. Now, is it true that you refuse to wear socks during your broadcast in Dallas?
Yes, you've been on Wikipedia, haven't you?
been all over the place. You search your name, there's like 50 pages. So we read them
there
all.
You go.
We do our
I don't know how
research.
many are good. I don't do the name search. I learned that a long time ago. Stay away from the internet and your own name. We had an incident when I was in Dallas and I was working at the local station. We were we did like 50 over-the-air Texas Ranger games. So I was, I guess for lack of a better term, they still haven't figured out a right name for it for baseball, but a sideline reporter. I was a guy who floated around the stands. I talked to the players, that kind of thing, and do that. So I don't know if you've ever been in Texas in the middle of summer. It's 110 degrees out there, some of those games. And it was hot, hot, hot. So just my thing was I look professional. I'd have a nice shirt on, a pair of slacks. And at that time you're wearing boat shoes. And I just didn't wear socks with them because it's like, well, who cares? And it's 1,000 degrees. So we had a news director at the time who was a guy who liked to put his thumb on everything. Let's just say it that way. And he saw me at the game not wearing socks. Like, you got to wear socks. I go, well, why do I have to wear socks? Nobody sees my feet.
Right.
He's like, well, you have to wear them because I said so. And that was, I'll be honest with you, that was the trigger point. He was like, look, okay, you're not my father. You don't tell me I've got to. Well, then I'm going to suspend you. I was like, okay. So then again, I was 20, let me see. I was 26 when I went to Dallas. So I was 26, 27. So I was young, had a little fire in me. So I'm like, oh, go ahead and suspend me. I don't care. I'm going. So I went home. I literally left the game, went home. I'm sitting at home and I get a phone call and it's the general manager of the station. He's like, what are you doing tonight? I go, well, obviously I'm sitting at home. He said, why don't you come over to the stadium and meet me up in the suite they had. And he sat me down. He's like, look, I won't mention the guy's name. But anyway, that he was wrong, and he shouldn't have approached it that way. Look at his side. You're representing the station. Do us a favor. How about when you're at the stadium, you wear socks, and then the rest of the time you don't have to wear socks? And I go, all right. Really, are we picking over this? But at some point, you go, let me be a mature adult here, and in the spirit of compromise, during the 3 hours I'm in a baseball stadium, I'll wear your socks, and then the rest of the time I don't. And that's what the whole incident was all about. And I was back on the air the next day.
You should have got some station branded socks there.
I should have gotten an endorsement deal out of it. If that had happened now.
Wouldn't you rather wear the socks inside as opposed to outside?
One would think.
The sweat?
Well, also one would think that whether or not someone who is standing up and you only see them from the chest up has socks on is insignificant anyway, especially in Texas. You know what I mean? At a baseball game.
This is wild. I can't get over this.
You never knew I was such a rebel, did you?
No. I can't believe it.
I didn't peg you.
What a story. What a story. Now, Curt, you also did some radio work as well. Mm-hmm. Now, for you, biggest differences between doing radio, where basically you could speak for 20 minutes straight, versus TV, teeing things up and speaking in segments.
I think the first real radio gig I had, because we've all done things dabbling here and there, but I had a Monday through Friday gig at The Ticket, which is a legendary station in Dallas, won Marconi Awards and all that stuff. But I was there at the start. We started in 1994, and I was there day one. Second show, Skip Bayless was on 6 to 9. Curt Menefee was on 9 to 11. And so I was there from that moment on. And that, I think, was instrumental in my success in this business, because when you're doing television, local television, and you're doing news and you're doing, features and highlights, majority of it is scripted, and so you're reading a script, you write a script, you read it, you kind of go over it. I would try and ad lib highlights just for fun, just to entertain myself. But it's 30 seconds worth of highlights, what the plays are, those kinds of things. By doing radio, it made me think on the fly, because you never know what the next caller is going to ask, say, where they're going to take you. You may have an idea for the theme you're going to have for the day or the guests that you're going to have, but a lot of that changes based off of news because you're live on the air. And just because one topic decides, that might be more entertaining than what we had planned. So, but it taught me to think on the fly. And that, I think, transferred into my television work, not only as a local guy, but not long after that, I started doing play-by-play, which obviously is 100% thinking on the fly. And I think had I not had that radio background of doing 2 hours a day, 5 days a week, that it may have been a tougher transition for me. But radio, I think, seriously was instrumental in my development as a broadcaster.
And you won 4 Katie Awards when you were in Dallas?
It's the equivalent of Emmys in Texas, yes. Everything has to be different in Texas.
Right. Still a very significant achievement. Obviously, you were incredibly good at what you did. So now we're going to take you to your time in the Big Apple. You mentioned before, got the job with Fox, and you did host, and you did MSG Sports Desk, which used to be a show that Nick and I used to watch a lot. So who was the person that was instrumental in getting you to New York? Did somebody recruit you? Did you just put your name in to No,
it was I actually just traded emails with her 2 days ago. Lisa Gregorius Dempsey is her name. She has been the executive producer for Extra since '96, which is when she left New York. So the story goes, I was in Dallas '92 to '95. So in '94, Lisa got hired as the news director at the Fox station in Dallas. And she approached me about leaving the station I was at to come over to do, sports on their local newscast in Dallas. And I had a conversation with her, and my contract wasn't up for another year. And I'm like, I don't really want to do that. One, I don't believe in breaking contracts. Two, I'm not sure if my future is here in Dallas forever. So I don't want to make a move and then you're kind of there for another number of years. Even though I enjoyed my time in Dallas, it was just, I was 27, 28 at that time. So I was thinking of bigger fish. So anyway, I wound up not going with her. A year later, I get a call from her. She goes, "Hey, I'm the news director at the Fox station in New York. I know your contract's up now. You want to come to New York?" Well, then it was a different decision, And so I went there, and it was, honestly, she's like, "Look, you just have to come meet the GM. As long as she doesn't freak out about you, the job's yours. Again, don't be nervous." So I went to New York, had the meeting, and how when you've done well, you had a good meeting. I knew when I left that meeting that was going to be my next gig. But it came because I turned her down in Dallas. She wound up going to New York, and I thank her all the time. She kept me on her radar and wound up getting me there. She hired me in New York, and I had a couple of about a month of time left in Dallas. So I knew I was leaving Dallas and going to New York. In that time, in the interim, she had me fly out to Los Angeles because that was the second year of Fox Sports. Fox Sports started in '94. And so that '95 year was going to be the second year of football. And that was all they had back then. And so she flew me out to meet David Hill, who's the CEO of Fox Sports, and just to kind of run by him and get him to know me. Got on his radar. That fall, I started doing sidelines. It sent me over to NFL Europe to do play-by-play, and that's where I got on the network's radar. It all kind of worked out in large part because of Lisa.
Yeah, late '90s, the New York sports team's pretty good time to be there. A lot to cover, and
it was great.
I was telling Europe.
I tried to tell George Steinbrenner. This is how old it is. So when I was in Dallas '92 to '95. The Cowboys won a Super Bowl. Jimmy left, and then they lost in the NFC Championship game. So I left after that. I went to New York. The Yankees wound up winning 4 World Series in the next 5 years. So I had a run of, I got to do math now, 8 years where I had the local team I was covering because we were the Yankee station in New York. The local team that I was covering won 6 championships in 8 years. And that's a pretty good run. So I told Steinbrenner, I'm like, well, you talk to Jerry. Jerry hasn't won since I left, and you've only been winning since I've been here. So, maybe I deserve a little bit of credit for this. But it was a great run. It was a great time. And that's one of the things I do miss, if you will, about being involved in local sports. From when you're doing it, and trust me, I love what I do. So I'm not criticizing it. But you look at things from 30,000 feet when you're in a studio, and you're covering the entire league, or if you're on SportsCenter or whatever, you're covering all sports. When you're in a local market, you can have relationships with individual players and managers and front office people, but you also not necessarily rooting for the team, but there's a vested interest there. And there's a whole sense of community that the city has, or at least the fans of that team, if you're in New York, where people maybe split allegiance. But there's something cool and exciting about just being around that when it's happening, as opposed to just, okay, this is team X won the Super Bowl this year and we happen to be covering it. So that local TV does have something that gets your juices going that national just doesn't quite have the same.
And especially if you're in New York, and if you were in New York now, I mean, these Jets fans would be tweeting you nonstop. I mean, what a breed of animals. I mean, sorry, Joe.
Yeah, but that's I tell you, Joe. I've known Joe Douglas for almost 20 years. He's a great dude, man, and he's a smart football guy. I think he's got them on the right path. He had to go and do a little house cleaning first. The house cleaning, I think, is done. Now I think the arrow's pointing up, so you can feel good about it.
Yeah. We'll see what happens. Things are looking good mostly in New York right now. But I wanted to touch on NFL Europe because that was a cool. I remember watching that as a kid. NFL is going to be in Europe a lot moving forward here, not necessarily with teams, but the NFL Europe kind of worked, I think, as like a good system to kind of let NFL scouts take a look in the spring, see what's going on. Yeah, it was big time, and it was good I think it was good for a lot of broadcasters as well, yourself included.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, because I told you I was in New York, and I had never done play-by-play, not in college. My college didn't have a journalism program. So I had never done anything besides sit behind a desk, or do feature reporting. And so Fox was like, well, have you ever done play-by-play? I go, no, we'll send you to Europe, and we'll let you do a game in NFL Europe. And that was in 1997. I did one game in Amsterdam. Then they said, we're going to send you next year and have you do two. So I did two in 98. And that fall, I started doing an NFL schedule. And just kind of snowball from there. But there was a point towards the end of the NFL Europe League, 2005 was the last year I did it. At that point, I think, in the numbers I'm trying to do this off the top of my head, but it's like 17% of the players in the National Football League had played in NFL Europe, including, Pro Bowlers. I mean, everybody knows Kurt Warner, obviously, is in the Hall of Fame. But, Jake Delhomme, John Kitna, Lawrence Phillips played in that, Leroy Glover. I mean, there are just countless guys that have played in there. You had coaches that have been there. So the point is, I think almost a fifth of the players had been in the league. Most of the referees definitely had been there. I'm talking head officials and the backups, because they sent them there for work in the offseason. Every play-by-play guy and most of the analysts at Fox at that point had been over in NFL Europe at some point, because Fox ran the television portion. You've looked right now at who benefited from NFL Europe out at Fox. I did play-by-play for the first time. I'm in the studio now. Troy Aikman did play-by-play for the first time. He's there. Daryl Johnston, Kenny Albert transitioned into football. All our lead director, Rich Russo, who works Super Bowls with Joe and Troy, he and I worked together in NFL Europe for the first time. Chuck McDonald, who's their lead college football producer, he's an NFL Europe product. I mean, there's just so many people that benefited from it. And if you go on the Park Avenue and people that are in that office there, we run into people all the time that were in PR in NFL Europe or working somewhere in the league office, that was their stepping stone to work up. And that was a great league that benefited so many people in so many different ways, not just the players that people hear about.
Yes, I'm sure minus broadcasters. We had Kenny on our show, and he discussed his last football game he did was Wagner College. The next game he's doing NFL. So NFL Europe definitely helped a lot of people. And we had some media execs on, including Jacob Ullman, who worked at Fox, and he was saying how important that was. And fast forward to last year, XFL. It was kind of the same thing. And now, how fun was that for you to be back in the booth? And second of all, I knew it the first minute I heard your new colleague, Greg Olson with Kevin Burkhardt. I knew Greg Olson was going to be signed up doing NFL games this year. So what was your experience like with the XFL?
I enjoyed it. I really did. You know, I go back to the thrill of play-by-play is literally the fact that it's play-by-play. You've got no idea what's going to happen 30 seconds from now. You know, it could be an 80-yard touchdown. It could be an interception. I mean, anything in the world could happen, and you get the juice of that live crowd, no matter the size of the crowd. And so I miss that aspect of it. Again, I'm not complaining about my job. Trust me, I love my job. But that's something that it kind of got reignited 2 seasons ago when I did a couple of Saturday games, those December games on the NFL Network. Again, Fox had to produce them. So I wound up doing games on the East Coast. I would fly back late Saturday night and do our game, our studio on Sunday. But it reignited the play-by-play desire for me. And so when Fox, I didn't even know they had signed the XFL. And it was, hey, can you come over here and talk for a second? Yeah, we're signing the XFL and we want you to be our lead play-by-play guy. Whoa, okay. So then, you know, we had some discussions about it because I wanted to make sure that it was going to be legitimate. You know, I didn't want to do, and this is just me, I didn't want to do the 2001 version of the XFL. Mm-hmm. If it were going to be legitimate football, then you can experiment and have, like, I think some great things, you know, like having the camera on the official in the booth. And some of the rules things, I'm fine trying those, but I wanted to make sure it was going to be legitimate football. Right. So we had those discussions and I was assured that it would be, and it absolutely was. And then once I found out I was going to be partnered, you know, you take a look at the team they put together. And you got Joel Klatt as my analyst, who obviously the lead guy at Fox. I mentioned Chuck McDonald. He's the lead college producer. He works with Joel regularly. And then Rich Russo. All these guys, again, NFL Europe connections, but they're all the number one guy on at their job at Fox. So you knew they were putting together a legitimate team. And so it was a no-brainer for me. And I loved doing the play-by-play, but I love football and just being around it. So any opportunity I get to do it. And I can tell you, the folks at the XFL were as open and welcoming as you could imagine. You know, we got feedback that was all positive, at least for us. I don't know what they were telling other people, but it was all positive. And that was a great experience. It really was. And it's one of those, you cross your fingers and you hope that it was going to come back and we'll be able to, we'll see. But
so
I was
anything the Rock touches, turns to gold. So we'll see.
That's true.
We'll see next year.
You can't keep putting 2 or 3 years in between this, though. At some point, you got to play back to back.
I think of any sports thing, XFL got screwed the most with the pandemic because they would have been playing now. Like, it would have been a great.
Well, and momentum was picking up. We had at that point, it was really at the midway point of the season, and they'd had 40,000 in Seattle twice. They had it was close to 40,000, like 38 or something in St. Louis. The next game,
St. Louis.
Yeah, the next game in St. Louis was sold out in the Dome because they had the LA Wildcats coming in St. Louis's mind. There's this rivalry. That was their big rival. So, but the crowds were getting bigger. The ratings were doing well. And so I could see momentum carrying into not only then, into the next season. But I remember that, and it happened. I was supposed to go to DC that week, and then the big game in St. Louis is going to be the next week. And on Wednesday, I had a text from someone in the league, said, "Don't get on the flight tomorrow." I'm like, "Uh-oh." I'm like, okay, so and then you check, and then at that point, because that was right after the Rudy Gobert thing had happened. I think that happened on Tuesday, but then they had decided they were going to postpone for at least a week and then pick it up from there. But yeah, that was, I think, as impacted as anything else because it was just getting started. And unlike so many other leagues where they can, okay, we can pause and pick it up again, it was hard for them to do that.
Yeah, we'll see. Hopefully that comes back. Now, when you're initially approached to become a studio host, like you're just saying all this stuff, you love being in the booth. It's so much fun. Mm-hmm. What was that process like for you? Did you maybe have to come in and do an audition with Terry? Like how did that work out?
Yep. That's exactly how it happened, actually. So this was 2006. And at that point, I was doing, play-by-play for Fox. I finished up. I'll always remember the last play-by-play game I had, at least at that point, was in Green Bay. And it was on New Year's Day. I was sick. I was so sick with the flu, cold, blah, 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 blah. I fly back home, get a couple of weeks, and I was going to go on vacation. And I was going to Australia and New Zealand. And 2 days before I'm taking off, I get a phone call. Hey, James Brown told Fox he's leaving, going to CBS. It hadn't been announced yet. He was going to do the NFC Championship game, and then that was going to be it. So it's like, okay. So I pick up the phone, and obviously I'm already in the Fox ecosystem at that point. So I remember calling Scott Ackerson, who was the producer of the pregame show at the time, and Jimmy Johnson, and because I had known Jimmy obviously a little bit from being at Fox, but a little bit from being in Dallas his last 2 years there. And I was like, hey, I'm just saying, if you hear anything, I'd love to be involved in the process. So if you hear my name or whatever, please put in a good word for me, that kind of thing. And Jimmy's like, oh, okay. Then he hung up the phone. I'm like, I'm not quite sure Jay even knows who I am. So I think he's just being nice. So, but anyway, so I'm got 2 days in between. And so like the day I'm leaving, because it was a night flight, not just so I remember it. And I called Ackerson again. I was like, dude, what are you guys doing? He's like, don't worry about it. David Hill then called me, who again was the CEO of Fox. He's like, go on your vacation. We haven't figured out what we're doing yet. We'll let you know. You'll be in the process. Okay. So I'm in Australia, or excuse me, I'm in New Zealand at this time. And I get an email from David Hill. When are you getting back? And at that point, I'm throwing out dates here. April 14th, I'm coming back. I was like, but I can come back earlier if you want. He's like, no. Just let us know when you get back because we're going to have auditions and I want you to be a part of it. So I came back on the date I was supposed to. I lived in New York at the time, flew from Auckland to New York, was home less than 24 hours, flew from New York to LA and did my audition. And it was me along with Terry. And we just went through the process, went over highlights, scoreboards, those kinds of things. And I think they had 8 or 10 people in that day, and some of whom I knew. And I don't want to put it out there, but I think the competition was pretty good. And so I was obviously really nervous and excited about it. But I go back to James Brown, and this is where I think it shows what a great human being he is. I knew JB actually before even Fox, but very casually, just as someone who's young in the business, who's seen someone on air who reached out to him, and he was always been kind. So when he left and he announced he was going over to CBS, and it was all public, and we knew about the auditions then, I hit him up and I said, hey, I'm auditioning with TV and Ackerson. What kind of pointers can you give me? And he broke it down for me that gave me, I think, another advantage with the auditions. Like, look, when they do the scoreboards, Ackerson only likes 4 seconds and he wants 1 highlight. When it's Terry, you've got to tee him up like this for certain things you've got to be aware of, like little things that helped me, I think. So when I went in, I was even more confident because I felt like I kind of had a secret playbook. Yeah. And so the audition obviously went really well. That was the only one I had to do, but that was in April. And so April goes by, and then I go back to NFL Europe in May, and time keeps ticking. I haven't heard anything. So I can remember I'm on the streets of Lisbon, at midnight because of the time difference. And I'm calling people back in the States trying to find out, have you heard anything? Have you heard anything? And finally, it was in July. So, the football season starts in August. So it was in July, and it was right before the 4th, because we were leaving New York to come to LA. And David Hill calls me, and he goes, hey, here's the game plan. And the idea was, we're going to go on the road this first year, and Joe Buck will be the main host. You'll finish up the show, which is the last 15 minutes because he has to go up to the booth. And then you'll do all the half times, you'll do the post game, blah, 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 blah. But we're kind of splitting it. I'm like, okay, well, what am I going to say? No. So that was, but I had to sit there from April until July, find it out. He's like, okay, now you can go out and drink and have a beer. Don't say anything to anybody. So now I got to keep the secret for a while. But it wound up being obviously something that really worked out. We did that road year. And then they brought it back in the studio and made me the full-time host the following year. So I think it was probably a smart transition on their part, because at that point, I don't know if anybody knew who Curt Menefee was, not that they do now, but I certainly was a guy who was doing the Rams-Arizona Cardinals game to 2% of the country. So it got me introduced maybe to a little bit bigger audience before I took over full-time.
Wow, your phone bill, those international charges must have been insane.
It was right at the beginning of, everybody had a cell phone. But the great thing was NFL Europe paid for my cell phone.
Oh, perfect.
So I was able to call people.
There you go. You're set. Now, you mentioned the show on the road, the studio. I'm curious, because it seems like his travel schedule is crazy, but Michael Strahan, does he ever complain about his nonstop flying? And what was it like, when you guys were doing the Thursday night pregame shows where you and Terry had to come to New York to do the shows from outside?
Well, but then last year with the pandemic, We were able to stay out here, and Michael had to stay in New York,
Right.
so nobody had to travel. Well, I didn't. I'll say it that way. I guess Terry and those guys had to come in from where they live. But no, I think I forgot the beginning of the question. I apologize.
Yeah, I just want to know, is just Strahan ever
Oh, no, yeah, no.
traveling? I doubt it.
No, not to me. I'll tell you that. So I think that he is one of those guys, and I go back to, and I think this is one of the things that makes our show so good is that we've all known each other forever. You know, I mean, Strahan is the newest guy in the show, full time, because Tony Gonzalez is there as well. When Jimmy's not, but you know, Strahan's been there 13 years.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the new guy, you know. So
and it's funny because Curt, you know, some people like maybe my grandma is just like, oh, I didn't know this guy was a football player.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, it's funny because they're older people and then they're younger people.
Right.
They don't know that he played in the National Football League. But again, I go back to by being in New York. I've known Michael, Jay Glazer, and I used to run the streets of New York together as single guys back in our day. So, we've known each other and we've had some stories we could tell. But that helped, I think, because when Michael joined the show, it wasn't, oh my gosh, this is Michael Strahan. And he wasn't the Michael Strahan he is now. He was just an ex-player. But it's like, so what? This is the guy, you know, I drank with and I did this with, and I know this story that nobody else knows. And the same thing, Jay was best man at our wedding. So like all of us on the show, we know each other, we get along, we're genuinely friends. And I think that's helped the transition. So to get back to your original question, Michael has never complained to me about it because I think he knows that I would just give him a hard time if he ever whined.
Curt, your honest assessment on Terry Bradshaw's reality show.
I have seen 5 minutes of it. And that's nothing to do with Terry. I think it's probably perfect for him. I'm not a reality show guy. And I think that, you know, he loves that. And it's perfect for him. He can sing, he can walk around with his shirt off. You know, you get a chance to meet his family. His daughters and his wife are all fantastic people. And I think it's great exposure for them. And it's done really well. I mean, the ratings did really well that first season. And, you know, I think it's the top rated thing they're bringing back to A&E now, or excuse me, to E. I'm on A&E. It's the top rated thing they're bringing back to E now that the Kardashians are gone. So I'm happy for him because the man needs an outlet. He's full of energy, you know, all the time. What you see with TV is what you get.
Yeah, there's clearly a strong camaraderie with all you guys. I wanted to ask, and you probably answered this a little bit when you mentioned that about Mike. But so, who is the serious one? Who is the prankster? Who is the one who's the diligent one who's on top of everybody else? You know, because obviously you all have a ton of personality. You know, there's a reason why you guys have stayed.
All right, so you have, but I'm going to take myself out of all of these. Okay, so the serious one is Howie. There's no question. And Howie is so, and he'll laugh. He laughs because we give him such a hard time. He will sit there and write forever. Like every thought he's got a notebook and he's writing stuff. We're like, what are you doing, dude? It's like, just pay attention. So we all give him a hard time. So he knows he is definitely the serious scholar. The prankster, I'd say Jay actually is. Jay likes pulling pranks on people and recording it and then showing it to other people. So he would be the top of the list for that. Terry is definitely, as I said, what you see is what you get. He walks around the building. He's just singing country songs out loud. He's telling jokes. He's making fun of himself. He is exactly the same person you see. And I say Jimmy is probably the guy that keeps everybody in line, the old coach. You know, he makes sure everybody, hey, when we say we're leaving at 5 after, we're leaving at 5 after, not 6 after. Nobody's late or else you're left. So Jimmy is still that guy, but it's so funny because Jimmy is such a kind person. And I know it's hard for people to believe, especially his former players. It's like, I've been with them countless times, whether it's Troy or Michael Irvin or what, they're like, where was this guy when I played? You know, if you had been that nice, maybe we would have all stuck together a lot longer. But he's such a sweet man. He really is. But he's still got that coach in him, man. You know, when I say, or the rule is to do this, this is what we're doing. And everybody's going to fall in line.
You guys make it look so easy. I know it's not, but
it's not.
How difficult is it when you're doing the 8-hour Super Bowl pregame show? I mean, to me, that seems very difficult to do.
You know, I go back to what I said earlier about it. Easy is not the right word, but I never look at it as that big a deal, even though it's a Super Bowl. I think part of what helps is that we only do the Super Bowl every 3 years.
Right.
If we had to do that every single year, then it's like I've talked to Rich Eisen about it. I go, man, I do not envy you because the NFL Network, first of all, they're longer, but it's every single year. You kind of need the years off to rejuvenate. And again, we're not digging ditches, we're not saving lives, but it's a long time and you've got to be on. If you think you've got to be on a Sunday in October, screw up on a Super Bowl Sunday or say the wrong thing. It can become an incident that's magnified way beyond sports, depending on what it is. So you really have to be focused and pay attention to it. But again, it's only every 3 years. We're off talking football. We're setting up features, half of it's music and entertainment and that kind of thing. And I really enjoy it. It's something you kind of get juiced for because it is special and it is different than what you do on a normal day-to-day basis.
That about it. You guys got the best seats in the house sometimes, like watching
Exactly.
on the front of field.
And it's funny because it's one of those things that people always ask, what's your favorite memory of games you've covered or whatever. My two favorite memories in my entire television career have happened at Fox Sports the last couple of years. One, I don't know if anything will ever top the Hall of Fame announcement when David Baker from the Hall of Fame came. It was during the playoff game, Seattle and Green Bay, and announced on our air that Jimmy Johnson was going to the Hall of Fame. And Jimmy got choked up and started crying. And I knew how much it meant to him. But nobody else on that set knew that was happening except me. Our producer knew, and he didn't even tell our CEO, Eric Shanks, until the day before. He didn't tell anybody else until he told the director and the audio guy 5 minutes beforehand, because they had to mic him up and let him know. But I was the only one on the set knew. And so I had to keep a secret for 3 days. And so it was actually pretty cool just to watch that. Nothing will ever top that. But the second favorite moment was at the Super Bowl, and it was the New England 28-3 comeback against the Falcons. And I grew up in Atlanta, Falcon fan, yada, yada, yada. But I realized I was a TV person when I was more excited about an overtime game at the Super Bowl that was on Fox being the first ever than I was about the Falcons. Disappointed in them losing. But anyway, watching Howie Long, because his son Chris played with New England. And Chris wound up winning back-to-back Super Bowls with New England and Philly, but he hadn't won at that point. And the emotions of a father standing there side by side with Howie and watching him as the Patriots came back and as that game went into overtime. And I talked to Howie now, and we'll talk about things that happened. He doesn't remember moments, just conversation or in the show, because you could tell he was in another world, he was in another place. But for me, that was so cool to watch because you could see the pride that he had in his son, but also how he was rooting so hard and there was nothing he could do about it. And that is what was interesting because as a player, you feel like you have some control. But as a father, you can just stand there and just watch. And, all these parents, I think we forget that sometimes. Families, husbands, wives, siblings, parents, all these athletes out there, they're not just athletes to them. That's someone's son or brother or whatever, and they're pulling for them so hard, they're rooting for them. And just to be able to kind of witness that and remind yourself of it was kind of cool.
Give us a memorable, funny moment on set. There's been plenty. To me, the one that sticks out as a viewer is that you were introducing that Alex Rodriguez has joined the network. He comes out, you have him throw the football, and he takes out the monitor. I thought that was hysterical.
And again, that was not planned 100%. So that one, that was a good one. I think one of the ones that we often talk about, because there are obviously so many moments, but even when it was the year before, it was Strahan's final year playing. And we brought him on. We knew he was going to be with us the next year. It hadn't been announced, but we brought him on their bye week, and he came in the studio and he sat with us. And we're like, "Hey, before you go, we got a gift for you." He was like, "Oh, okay. What is it?" He's still a player at this point. And Michael was going through a very public, contentious divorce. And so when they brought the gift out, it was half a fruit basket. And he goes, "What is this?" And Bradshaw goes, "Well, your ex-wife got the other half, so we figured we'd give you this." And so he died laughing. But at that point, it showed that he could take a joke. Right. He knew he was he still talks about it. So that's why I'm free to talk about it publicly. But I mean, that's one that kind of sticks around. It's like, this is who we are, man. We make fun of each other. It's locker room humor, but you better not do it. It's like your brother. If you do it, we've got your back and we're ready to fight. But amongst ourselves, we can always do that. And that's one that stands out to me as being one that I thought showed a lot about who we are and Michael into what he was coming into.
So freaking cool. Such great stories. So got a couple more things for you, and then we're going to let you go. I want to ask about America's Top Dog on A&E.
Yes.
Who approached you about doing that?
Well, that's one. I'm not a huge social media person, but most of my posts are, I think, probably myself and my two dogs. And I think that's where it came from. I've kind of had a casual conversation, but A&E was looking to start the show. It was a year ago. And it's a dog competition show where it's basically American Ninja Warriors with dogs. And so they run the course, they go head to head. It's a time competition. The winner gets 10 grand plus 5,000 donated to the animal charity of their choice. They get to come back at the end of the year for 25,000 and another animal charity donation to be crowned America's top dog. So they approached me just out of the, here's another. So a lot of my off season, normally I'm going to grad school right now, but normally spent vacationing. So I told you about being in Australia and New Zealand when I got the Fox gig. The A&E gig, I was in Sri Lanka. And I get an email, time difference, whatever. I have an email from my agent says, hey, A&E approached me about you hosting the show, America's Top Dog. I'm like, oh, what's it about? He's like, I don't know. I said, well, shouldn't you find that out before you kind of reach out? So it takes a couple of days with the time difference and everything. They send me the tape of the idea, the concept of the show, and I was in right away. It was a no-brainer. I was like, work out the deal. So I got that done while I was in Sri Lanka before I came back. We did the first season of the show. And then last year, we changed the talent. I'm still there, but the co-host is now David Keckner, which most people will recognize as soon as you see him if you don't recognize the name. But he was champ in Anchorman, and he's been in countless television shows and movies. So he's now my co-host, and it's got more of a fun comedic tone this year as well, I think. Rachel Bonetta works on the sideline with us, interviewing the handlers after they're done with the dogs. But it's a fun family atmosphere, and I think that's one of the things I enjoy. And that's what we heard after the first season, with so many people watched it with their kids, and there's so few programs that you can do that now and not have to worry about explaining to your kid what that means or what was going on. And it's just a fun competition. The numbers were great. I know when it debuted last year, it was the highest new show highest rated new show that A&E had in 4 years. And so they came back this year, and season 2 starts Tuesday, the 29th, 8 p.m. Eastern time, 7 Central, only on A&E. And it'll be every Tuesday from that point on.
Great plug, phenomenal plug, absolutely. He's hilarious. She's very funny. Very terrific people working with you.
Fantastic.
We wish you the best of luck with the show.
Thank you.
Obviously, it's a hit already. No surprise there. Last question for you is I wanted to cover the book that you co-wrote, Losing Isn't Everything.
Yes.
So book came out a couple of years ago. Forgive me if I don't know exactly how to pronounce the other author's name. Michael Arkush or
Arkush.
There you go.
Yes.
I was close.
Yeah,
I was close. But you wrote a book. You dabbled into writing a little bit here. So tell our listeners what that book is about and where they can find it.
Well, you can find it wherever books are sold, and I'm sure there are plenty of copies left around. It came out in 2016. And this is where I'm going to blame Trump. And it's not for the politician, it's for winning the election, because we came out on November 1st. We were the #2 book on Amazon. That night, the presidential election happened, and everybody stopped buying books that weren't about politics. And so the whole thing fell off a cliff because people were so wrapped up in what was going on in the presidential election. But the book did well. The publishing company was happy, and they've approached me about doing some follow-ups and stuff, and I just haven't found the right approach yet that I want. But Losing Isn't Everything, and I just wanted to go back because I think we can all learn from sports. I think that's one thing, even as a kid you learn, but as you get older, because we all have things in our life that doesn't quite work out the way we want it to. You wind up getting divorced, you lose your job, you lose a loved one. How do you cope with those kind of things? And I think we're all trying to find coping strategies. And I wanted to go back to sports and look at people that had been involved in some of the biggest sports losses, memorable ones, Mary Decker falling at the Olympics, or everybody talks about the Boston Red Sox, and everybody looks at Bill Buckner. But I went back and talked to Calvin Schiraldi, who lost games 6 and 7 with the lead for the Red Sox. I talked to Craig Elo, who Jordan hit the shot over. Aaron Crickstein, who lost that classic match to Jimmy Connors. I talked to Rodney Harrison, who David Tyree caught the pass over in the Super Bowl. And those people, to find out how they got up the next day, so to speak, with the whole world looking at you and going, boy, you're a failure, but kept going, and what lessons they got out of it, and what we all could learn out of it, and how we can handle it. And I thought it was a great, at least in my mind, study about human nature, because I learned so much about people. And it was interesting because the people that were involved in team sports, seemed to have a harder time overcoming those losses because they felt such a responsibility to other people. Whereas people involved in individual sports, they weren't happy about it, but they were all able to deal with and process it because there's no one else to blame. You know, you kind of go, I screwed up. Whereas for the other guys, it's like, I screwed up and that cost someone else a ring. Or you know, Rodney Harrison cried while we were talking because he was so close to Junior Seau, and that was Junior Seau's only chance to win one. Never did, and obviously we know what happened since then. And so he feels a burden about that. Calvin Schiraldi, 30 years later, his wife and daughter sat him down, but his wife told him she's going to get a divorce because he's never been the same since blowing the 86 World Series. And his father had committed suicide, not because of that, but he saw himself in the same path, and he had never let it go. And so he was still dealing with it. But then you get a guy like Jean Van de Velde who blew the British Open. He's like, look, I'm French. I went out and had some wine. I did TV commercials making fun of myself 6 months later. Like, what's the big deal? You know? So it was really interesting to find out why some people are able to bounce back. And again, how we can all use that to kind of better ourselves when we have adversity in our own lives.
Excellent. I just bought the book, so I can't wait to read
Okay.
it. I did.
Well, thank you.
I did. I bought the book. I wanted to.
I have an appetizer tonight at dinner on your behalf. Thank you.
There you go.
You just bought it.
So over the course of the last hour or so, I have learned that number one, Curt Menefee travels really well. Number two, he's incredibly good at keeping secrets. And number three, he's well versed and very, very good at what he does. And he's got amazing stories. And we're very happy you shared some of them with us. This was a lot
My
of fun.
pleasure, guys.
This was freaking awesome to do. You were awesome. So what we do is we usually give our guests here the last words, but you give us a lot of great stuff in between.
Okay.
If there's anything else you would like to share or promote, go ahead. The floor is all yours.
No.
Thank you again for coming on and doing this with us. Really
My pleasure. As long as people remember to watch America's Top Dog on A&E Tuesday nights, 8:00 Eastern, 7 Central. And then, of course, football season will kind of take care of itself, I have a feeling. People will know where I am. That's it, guys. I appreciate it. This was fun.
We're going to have full stadiums.
Yes,
again. To get back
absolutely.
And one extra week in the studio of Curt and the guys.
There we go. And one last week of preseason. So we benefit both ways, I think.
Curt, you still doing the Seahawks this preseason?
Yes.
Yep. All right. Yep. Back in the booth.
With Rock Hewitt.
Looking forward to it. All right, Curt, we appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun. So that's going to do it here for this episode of You Know I'm Right for our special guest, the doctor himself, Curt Menefee, and for my coach, Joe Calabrese. I'm Nick Durst, and this has been You Know I'm Right.